The day my husband took me for a pregnancy checkup, he got a call from his old flame. Just a simple "I miss you," and he left me standing on the curb without a second thought. I expected to lose it, to yell and scream at him, but I didn't. I just stayed quiet and calmly booked an appointment for an abortion the next day. But when my husband found out, he completely lost it, practically shoving his beloved out of his arms, begging me in tears to forgive him. Today was supposed to be the day Chris Blanchard, my husband, took me to the hospital for a pregnancy checkup. Halfway there, his old love, Fern Robbins, called to tell him her son had a high fever. Without any explanation, he told me his 3-month-old pregnant wife to get out of the car and drove straight to Fern's house, which was in the opposite direction. He left me stranded on a deserted road. The heavy snow that night had turned everything into an icy mess, and I slipped and fell. Pain shot through my stomach like 100 needles stabbing at once. A kind stranger found me and drove me to the hospital. I was so glad to hear the doctor said my baby was fine. After the checkup, I kept calling Chris, hoping he'd come pick me up, but he never answered. Call after call went to voicemail or a busy signal. But when Fern called him, he picked up right away. It reminded me of how things were before we got married. His phone was always on, always waiting for my call. I went home, my heart heavy, and just collapsed on the bed. Chris came back around 1 a.m., annoyed and muttering under his breath as he walked in. "You went to bed already. You didn't even leave the light on for me." I used to wait for him no matter how late he came home. And if I fell asleep, I'd leave the bedside lamp on. But tonight, I just didn't have it in me to care. I turned over, facing away from him, and leave his questions on air. He clicked his tongue in irritation. "Are you serious right now? Fern's son had a-degree fever. If I hadn't taken them to the hospital, he could have ended up with brain damage. Show a little compassion, would you? Did you think about me at all when you left me on the curb in the middle of a snowstorm? Did you even care if I managed to get to the hospital or not? I am pregnant, for heaven's sake, with our baby." I snapped. "Who's your wife, Chris? Is Fern so incapable that she can't call on her own? Why does she have to ask someone else's husband to deal with her problem?" I kept going. Chris let out a long, exasperated sigh, looking at me like I was losing hold. "Don't be so petty, Elodie. Fern's just returned from England. Her British husband divorced her, and she doesn't have anyone else here. I'm the only person she knows. Things hasn't been easy for her. Raising a kid alone is draining. If there's something I can do to help her, then I had to. For her." I felt tears prick at the corners of my eyes. "Then why don't you just divorce me and go be with her? That's what you want, right?" The more I talked, the more my heart hurt. I remembered the days before we got married. The Chris I used to know would put me first in everything. When I had even a slight cold, he'd be frantic, rushing me to the hospital, ignoring urgent calls from his boss in the process. But now, he was like a stranger, indifferent and distant. Maybe he saw the heartbreak on my face, because he softened a little, stepping closer and wrapping me in his arms. "Come on, don't be mad, honey. Forgive me this one time. I swear I'll never do it again," he said softly, trying to soothe me. One of his hands slipped under my collar, while his lips brushing against my neck. "I've missed you. It's been a while since we've done it." I slapped his hand away, hard. "What do you mean, a while? We just did it last month. The doctor warned me no more sex until after the baby's born, or I could miscarry." All right, Chris muttered, clearly frustrated as he let me go. He grabbed his phone, and whatever he saw made his whole face light up. His eyes went soft and gentle, and he looked completely absorbed. I called his name, but he wasn't answering. It was like he didn't even hear me. While he was in the shower, I picked up his phone from the bedside table. To my surprise, he had changed the lock screen password. It used to be my birthday. After several failed attempts, I tried entering and it worked. "You might also like marrying his rival Bethany from now, and I only love you from now on. I only love you. Beth, marry you again, never get away, marry you again. Never get away." November 23rd was the day his precious Fern Robbins returned from England after her divorce. I couldn't help but scoff as I unlocked Chris's phone, immediately seeing their message history. Fern's words dripped with sweetness. Her constant calling on my husband was getting on my nerves. "Fern, Chris, thank you so much for today. I don't know what I would have done without you. If only you were Tony's dad. Chris, if you don't mind, let Tony call me dad. I actually quite like it." Topped with smiley face, my heart sank, my whole body going numb. It felt like all the blood in my veins froze solid. Just then, a notification popped up, another message from Fern. It was a voice message, just 2 seconds long. I hit play. 1F60, a young boy's voice chirped, "Thank you, Daddy Chris. I couldn't help but laugh, though it was the kind that laced with bitterness. Here I was, carrying Chris's child, and he was off playing father to another woman's son. I could still remember his promises from our wedding night, the vows to love me forever, to be loyal, to cherish only me. It had barely been 3 years, and those promises had rusted over. Chris stepped out of the shower, catching sight of me with his phone. His face contorted with rage, and he shoved me hard enough that I crashed to the floor. Pain shot through my belly, and I had to grit my teeth against it. What the hell do you think you're redoing? Ever heard of privacy? I stumbled and hit the floor, feeling a sharp pain in my stomach. I gritted my teeth against the pain. Privacy. What about boundaries? I spat, struggling to get back up. You letting Fern's kid call you dad. What does that make our baby? Oh, come on. It's just a godfather thing. Why do you have to make everything a big deal? He said coldly. He didn't even bother to help me up, staring down at me with annoyance, his brows furrowed. It's not like I'm leaving you to marry Fern. Isn't that enough for you? His words stung. My thoughts flashed back to 3 years ago when he proposed. He had looked at me with eyes full of warmth back then, his words sweet enough to make bees swarm. But now he couldn't even look at me without disdain, as if I was something he wished he could scrape off his shoe. Just as I was about to respond, his phone rang. I glanced at the screen. He had saved Fern's contact under a ridiculously affectionate nickname, Fernie. He picked up immediately, completely unbothered by my presence. Hey, Chris, Fern's voice purred from the other end. Sorry to bother you again, but Tony's been fussy all night. He says he misses his daddy Chris, and wants you to come and read him a bedtime story. Chris's face lit up like a kid on Christmas morning. He didn't hesitate for a second. Isn't he a cute boy? Well, I can't let him down, can I? Alright, I'll be right there. Wait for me, Tony. Daddy's on the way. Chris, I called out, my voice trembling as he headed for the door, practically begging. Please don't go. Stay here with me. I sprained my ankle when you pushed me. It was true, my ankle throbbed with every slight movement, the pain shooting up my leg like needles. But Chris just looked at me, eyes full of disdain. Seriously, I barely pushed you, Elodie. Stop being so dramatic. He shrugged on a fresh jacket, even taking the time to fix his hair in the mirror, and then turned to leave. I could feel my anger boiling over. Chris, if you walk out that door tonight, we're getting a divorce. You might also like marrying his rival Bethany from now on. I love you from now on. I only love you, Beth. Marry you again, never get away, marry you again. Never get away. Bubble puff. Divorce. Chris chuckled dismissively. Don't be ridiculous. You really want our child to grow up fatherless? He paused, turning to look at me. When he saw determination on my face expression, he shook his head in disbelief. Unbelievable. He walked over, scooping me up and dropping me on the bed like he was doing me a favor. There, all right. Just stay in bed and rest. You'll be fine by morning. I said nothing, watching him leave. Once he was gone, I pulled out my phone and scheduled an abortion for the next day. I couldn't do this anymore. I had to take control of my own life. Ignoring the pain in my ankle, I hobbled to the freezer, grabbed a washcloth, and chilled it until it was cold enough to use as a makeshift ice pack. I pressed it against my swollen ankle, tears streaming down my face. If he wouldn't take care of me, then I'd take care of myself. I didn't sleep a wink that night. It wasn't like I was waiting for him. I just couldn't. But just like what I had in mind, Chris didn't come home. At dawn, just as the sky began to lighten, a message from an unknown number came in. There were several photos, all of Chris. He was shirtless, love bites clearly visible on his neck, holding around a 5-year-old boy in his arms. The boy clutched a picture book while Chris read to him, his face gentle and relaxed, the very image of a doting father. I didn't need to ask who had sent the pictures. A moment later, a message came through. Fern, he really is a great dad, isn't he? My vision went blur as rage churned in my gut. I didn't reply and I blocked the number instead. At noon, I went to the hospital alone and had the abortion. My body was weak after the procedure and I had to rest for the entire afternoon before I could manage to walk without feeling like I'd collapse. Lying there in the sterile room, I had plenty of time to think. I was pondering about the loss and gain I had in the way. I didn't want my child to be born into a family poisoned by conflict. Bringing a baby into a world full of shouting parent and deceit would mean giving them a childhood starved of stability and love. If that was the life I could offer, then perhaps not giving birth was the more responsible choice. I refused to bury my head in the sand, pretending to be happy with a husband who had betrayed me, pretending that everything was okay while drowning in lies. I decided to let go of Chris for good. I would Spend the rest of my life learning how to love myself. When I finally left the hospital, hobbling down the steps on my weak state, I saw him. Chris, standing there like the universe's cruel joke, holding a little boy in one arm, and gripping a woman's hand with the other. It was Fern, of course. The woman who had stolen everything from me. They looked like a happy little family, a picture-perfect trio standing in the afternoon sunlight. I couldn't help it, I laughed. A sharp, bitter laugh that echoed off the hospital walls. It was all so pathetic, so cliché. What a lovely family, I said, slow claps punctuating each word, my voice filled with a cold, empty amusement. Chris's head snapped up, and I watched the panic flash across his face before he quickly let go of Fern's hand. He looked at Nami with a frown, his eyes narrowing. Elodie, what are you doing here? Elodie, what are you doing here? I gave him a thin, humorless smile. Getting an abortion, I said, my voice flat. I looked down at the boy in his arms, who was sticking his tongue out. Son, now. Congratulations. He's officially your father. All yours now. Chris froze, his face going pale. He set the boy down and stormed over to me, grabbing my arm tightly. What are you talking about? You got rid of our baby. Are you out of your mind, Elodie? His grip was so tight I could feel my bones grinding together, but I didn't flinch. What do you think I'm talking about? I yanked my arm free and, with a sick feeling in my stomach, slapped him as hard as I could. We're done, Chris. I want a divorce. Chris was stunned by my slap, standing there frozen, his face a mix of shock and disbelief. It was Fern who rushed to his side, hands cradling his face as if he were a wounded animal. She glared at me with red-rimmed eyes full of indignation. Elodie Martin, look at what you've done to him. You've gone too far, she yelled. Too far? I let out a cold laugh. Without a second's hesitation, I slapped her too, hard enough that the sound echoed down the sterile hospital corridor. If you think that's too far, then what do you call tearing apart someone's marriage? Does that make you the victim now? Fern let out a high-pitched scream, stumbling back, clutching her cheek in shock. Her son, who had been clinging to her side, jumped in front of her, arms spread wide as if to shield her. Don't hurt my mommy. You ugly witch, he shouted, his little face scrunched up in fury. I let out a bitter, humorless chuckle. A witch? If I'm the ugly witch, then your mom's the evil witch mistress, luring someone else's husband away. Enough. Chris's voice boomed across the hallway. He stepped forward, fury flashing in his eyes. Why didn't I realize how crazy you are? The commotion we were causing had attracted a crowd of onlookers, all whispering among themselves. I caught a few snippets, shameless, homewrecker, disgusting, and watched as Chris's face went beet red with embarrassment. He lashed out, kicking a potted plant at his feet, sending it crashing to the floor. Elodie, nothing ever happened between me and Fern, he shouted, pointing a shaking finger at me. She's right, you out of control. I've been too soft on you, and this is the result I get. I pulled out my phone and opened the photos Fern had sent, the ones that proved his lies. I zoomed in and showed them to the crowd, making sure everyone saw the damning evidence. Take a good look, everyone, I said, my voice cutting through the tense silence. This is my husband half naked at this woman's place in the middle of the night. Can you see those marks on his neck? Don't tell me they're mosquito bites. I raised an eyebrow, daring him to lie. There was an uproar. You might also like marrying his rival Bethany. From now on, only love you from now on. I only love you, Bath. Marry you again, never get away. Marry you again. Never get away. People started jeering at Chris. Someone even threw a piece of fruit at him. Rotten cheat, one person yelled. Hope you get struck by lightning. Chris's fury boiled over. He rounded on Fern, his face contorted with rage. You sent her those photos, he demanded, his voice shaking. What the hell were you thinking, Fern? Fern flinched under his glare, shrinking back, her eyes wide and guilty. She had nothing to say. The very photos she'd sent to taunt me had now turned the tide against them. I snorted and, with a dramatic flourish, yanked off my wedding ring. Without a second thought, I hurled it out the nearest open window. This marriage is over, Chris. I'll see you at the courthouse on Monday. You want a divorce that badly? Chris's voice was barely a whisper, but his eyes were blazing with fury and hurt. Fine. But don't come crying to me when you realize what a huge mistake you're remaking. I didn't even look back as I turned and walked away. Back at home, I called in a cleaning service. I instructed them to throw out every trace of Chris from the house, the clothes, the shoes, the stupid cologne he loved so much. I even had them take down our wedding portrait, which had hung in the living room like some cruel reminder of promises broken. This house was mine, bought with my own money long before I'd ever met Chris. I had given up my career when we married, choosing to play the dutiful wife, cooking and cleaning while he pursued his ambitions. but all my sacrifices had meant nothing to him, and now I was reclaiming my space. Women should never give up everything for a man. It's better to love a dog, they'll be loyal to you for life. As the cleaning crew hauled away the last of his things, the air in the house felt lighter, fresher, like I could finally breathe. I put on a bit of makeup, something light, just enough to make me feel good, and headed out to a pet shop, planning to buy a golden retriever puppy. A companion that would love me unconditionally. Halfway there, my phone rang. It was the hospital, informing me that Chris was causing a scene, crying and yelling, searching through the trash for the ring I had thrown away. He was disturbing the other patients, and they wanted me to come and take him home. "Oh," I said blandly, feeling no emotion whatsoever. "Sorry, but I have nothing to do with him. If you found him so troubling, you may call the police on him." When I returned home with the puppy, I saw him from a distance standing in the driveway, surrounded by the bags I had thrown out. The trash that had been neatly packed by the cleaners was now scattered everywhere. Chris was filthy from head to toe, covered in mud, with dirt caked under his nails. He must have spent hours digging through garbage at the hospital. The moment he saw me, he lunged forward and grabbed my wrist. His nails were black with mud or whatever that was. A shiver ran down my spine at the thought. "Why did you throw my stuff out? We haven't talked about this." "You have no right," he demanded, his voice hoarse. I yanked my hand back, wiping it with a tissue. "This is my house. I don't need your permission to kick you out. And don't touch me, you disgust me." His face twisted with hurt, the anger draining out to leave something pitiful behind. "Are you really going to divorce me?" His voice broke, his eyes pleading. "Do you think I am joking?" I said, my tone icy. I stepped around him, but he grabbed me again, holding on tight, his grip desperate. He pulled me close, wrapping his arms around me from behind, his voice shaking with emotion. "Don T, don't leave me, Elodie. I can't lose you. I Don T want a divorce. Get off me." My puppy, sensing my distress, started barking furiously, baring his tiny teeth at Chris. The sight of it was almost comical, and I couldn't help the cruel smile that twisted my lips. "Isn't this what you wanted? Now you can be with Fern all you want. Be a hero for her. You love her kid so much, after all. That's why I got rid of ours, so you could be Tony's one and only dad." Chris's face turned pale, and he shook his head. "No, that's not what I wanted. I never meant it that way. I never had anything with Fern. I just felt sorry for her and her kid, okay? It's not what you think. Can't you just have a little faith?" I kicked his luggage aside, sending a few bags sprawling. "No, I don't have faith left for you, Chris. The only thing I want is for you to get out of my life. That's why I'm divorcing you. Now, get lost." But instead of leaving, Chris sank to his knees, clinging to the hem of my pants with desperate eyes. If our child had lived," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I would have loved him more than anything. We can try for another one. We don't have to divorce. We can." Rage bubbled inside me, and I kicked him away with every ounce of force I could muster. I couldn't take another of his word. "Who in their right mind would have another child with you? You disgust me, Chris. This divorce is happening, whether you like it or not." Chris took the blow, not even bothering to defend himself. He seemed determined, as if he'd made up his mind to win me back. His hands shook as he reached into his pocket, pulling out a dirt-smeared wedding ring. "Elodie," he said, holding the ring up to me like a pathetic offering, "I found the ring you threw away. All I'm asking for is a chance. Can we please start over?" My lips curled into a bitter, cynical smile. "Oh, sure. And when Fern calls again, you'll just disappear, leaving me hanging, just like always, right?" "No, Elodie." His eyes brimmed with desperate tears, and he raised his hand, as if making a solemn vow. "I swear I'll come first from now on. And if I ever break that promise, may I die a miserable death." Now why had he only begun to beg that I was completely done with him? Did he only realize the value of what he had lost once it was gone? Why wait until the damage was beyond repair? He looked so pitiful, so fragile, that I couldn't help but let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Fine. Let's make a deal," I said, barely able to suppress a sneer. "If you can go an entire month without seeing or contacting Fern, we won't divorce. But if you fail, you'll regret ever doing that. Because if you fail, I will leave you with nothing." The challenge was simple enough. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't make it. Fern's birthday is 3 weeks from now. The terms were straightforward. But I knew Chris. Deep down, I was certain he wouldn't last. Fern's birthday was just around the corner. Knowing his weak will, and how he always caved to temptation, I was confident he'd slip up. It seemed like a simple deal, but I intended to make him leave. Chris, overconfident as always, accepted. Without a second thought. In the days leading up to Fern's birthday, Chris behaved surprisingly well. He barely left my side, as if trying to prove himself to me. More than once, I saw Fern's name light up his phone screen, but he would hang up the call right in front of me, unfazed. His phone was always on the table, so I could read the notifications. I watched as Fern's persistence played out in a flurry of texts, demanding to know why he was ignoring her, why he had suddenly gone cold. She even brought up their son, writing, "Dawn, do you care about Tony anymore? Tony says he misses his dad." For a moment, when he saw the name, Tony, Chris's expression softened just a flicker of emotion before it was replaced with a look of deep irritation. "See, honey," he said, turning to me with a helpless shrug. "I told you, she's the one who's been bothering me. Dawn, do you believe me now?" I didn't respond. I just kept pouring dog food into Bear's bowl, pretending not to hear him. The day before Fern's birthday, Chris called me to say he had to work late because of something urgent at the office. I played along, agreeing like the dutiful wife, but secretly, I decided to track his movements. Sure enough, Chris left the office right on time. He didn't linger there for even a second longer than necessary. But instead of heading home, he hailed a cab. I followed him discreetly and watched as he got out at a seedy Love hotel. There was Fern, waiting by the entrance. With a sultry dress and exaggerated pout. She was dressed provocatively, with way too much skin showing. Chris immediately took off his jacket and tried to drape it over her shoulders, but she slapped his hand away with an irritated scowl. "Oh, you actually showed up," Fern snapped. "And why do I only get to celebrate my birthday with you a day early? What kind of lousy excuse is that?" Chris was all smiles, trying to calm her down. "Come on, don't catch a cold, my lady. It's not like I have a choice. Elodie knows when your birthday is. If I suddenly claim I have to work on your actual birthday, she'd get suspicious. Besides, she had a hospital appointment today, so I knew she'd be busy and I could slip away to be with you." A hospital appointment. That was the excuse I'd fed him to test his loyalty, to see what he would do if he thought I was out of the picture. As expected, he didn't let me down yet again. Fern wasn't entirely convinced, though. She gave a small huff and stormed into the motel, leaving Chris to trail after her like an eager puppy. What I hadn't expected, though, was to discover that Fern wasn't just stringing along Chris. She had other lovers, too. As I was leaving the hotel, my phone rang. It was Claire, a woman I had met during that dramatic scene at the hospital when I had confronted Chris about our divorce. She had pulled me aside and asked for my number, saying she had been cheated on by a scumbag, too. I'd met Claire during that ugly scene at the hospital when I confronted Chris about the divorce. She had stopped me on my way out, asking for my number. She told me she'd been through her own betrayal by a cheating ex, but unlike me, she had never found the courage to face it so directly. She admired the way I'd handled things, confronting Chris and his affair partner without a second thought. Claire wanted to meet me at a nearby cafe, so I agreed. When we met up that evening, the first thing she did was slide a photo across the table. It was a snapshot of a man and a woman chapter-locked in a heated kiss inside a car. The woman, I recognized immediately. It was Fern, Chris's so-called one true love. The man was someone I didn't know, a middle-aged guy with a protruding belly. Claire's expression was tense as she explained. "That's Joe Hoover," she said. "My uncle. I had a feeling he was keeping a mistress, but I didn't have any proof until now. I've been tracking him for weeks. And finally, I caught him." She paused, her voice filled with disgust. "Turns out, his mistress is the same woman your husband is having an affair with." "Ex-husband," I corrected her. "Right, ex-husband. A man like that doesn't deserve to be called anyone's husband," Claire snapped. "And that woman, she's shameless. I even dug up some dirt on her. She was married before, overseas. Do you know why they divorced?" I shook my head. Chris had never mentioned it. "Because she was seeing someone else the whole time," Claire said, disgust clear on her face. "She's a serial homewrecker, preying on married men." Claire handed over the rest of the photos. She decollected. I thanked her, accepting them with a firm nod. "Thank you, Claire. You don't know how much this means to me." She waved her hands. "No need to thank me. I just hope that you'll move on from that trash and find a better life soon." The next morning, I was woken by the sound of the doorbell. I didn't need to guess who it was. He must have seen that I had thrown his luggage out again, along with the divorce agreement on top of the suitcase. Papers demanding he leave the marriage with nothing. I didn't bother chapter answering the door. The thought of seeing his pathetic face might ruined my appetite for breakfast, so I called him instead. He picked up almost instantly and I got straight to the point. "You broke the deal, Chris," I said casually. "What are you talking about?" He tried to deny it. "I didn't. You were at a Love hotel with Fern last night." I cut him off. "I have the photos. Do you want me to send them?" They're in HD. There was a long silence, followed by an explosion of rage. You followed me. You don't have right, Elodie. Well, I can't help it. We have a deal, remember. If I hadn't followed you, I wouldn't have known you cheated on me again, I said, sighing. I gave you a chance and you blew it. Sign the divorce papers and own up to your loss, Chris. Chapter he practically screamed, desperation seeping into his voice. It's all Fern's fault. She came after me. She seduced me like, oh, I know. I laughed. She did seduce you. Try to get her fingers wrapped around you. But know what? You are not the only one. There was a long pause before he blurted out, What do you mean? Congratulations, I said, my tone dripping with mockery. You've been cheated on, just like me. I swung the door open and tossed the stack of photos Claire had given me straight at his face. They scattered in the air, landing around him like confetti. Chris's face went ashen as he picked them up, staring at the evidence as if struck by lightning. His eyes were wide with shock and disbelief. No, this can't be true. Fern said she only loved me. She wouldn't do this. I shrugged. Then pretend I photoshopped them. Whatever helps you sleep at night. With that, I slammed the door shut, locking him and his fury out. Even through the thick wooden barrier, I could hear his enraged, incoherent screams. He was cursing Fern's very existence, calling her every name under the sun, cursing her family, her past, everything. I couldn't hold laughter escaping my lips. For the first time, Chris was getting a taste of the betrayal I'd endured for so long. And I didn't feel the least bit sorry for him the morning after. I felt unusually light, almost euphoric, as if a weight had been lifted off my shoulders. Humming to myself, I made my way to the kitchen and whipped up a breakfast, a simple, satisfying meal that tasted better than anything I'd had in months. It was like I could finally breathe again. After I finished eating and got ready to leave for the day, I noticed something. Chris hadn't signed the divorce papers. The contract, which had been carefully laid out the night before, was now in tatters, scattered across the living room floor. He must have torn it to shreds out of spite. Fine. If he wanted to make it difficult, we'd do it the hard way. I'd just file for a contested divorce. It would take more time and effort, but it was only a matter of legal paperwork now. I went to work and settled back into my chapter routine. For the first time in what felt like forever, I enjoyed being at my job. I worked through the day, diving into the tasks that had piled up during my chaotic weeks at home. It felt good to be busy, to have something to focus on that wasn't the mess Chris had made of our lives. Anything was better than the constant anxiety of waiting for him to come home, wondering if he'd been with her. Now, at least, my mind felt clearer, lighter. Just as I was packing up to leave, my phone rang. It was the police. They said my husband had been arrested for causing a disturbance and assaulting someone. I froze, my stomach churning, but I managed to ask for details. They said he'd been detained at Fern's house and that I might want to see the evidence they had. I went to the station and watched the surveillance footage they'd pulled. My heart pounded as the video played. Chris was there, standing at Fern's doorstep, his expression dark and tense. She opened the door with a coy smile, but instead of greeting her, he threw a punch, hitting her hard in the face. The impact knocked her off balance, and before she could react, he was on top of her, fists flying. He called her every degrading name imaginable, words I didn't even know he knew. It was horrific. Fern's cries were piercing, almost animalistic, but Chris didn't stop. I could see the fury on his face, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought his teeth might crack. She tried to crawl away, bruises already darkening on her face, but he followed her, relentless. Then, from the edge of the screen, her son appeared, a little boy, barely old enough to understand what he was seeing. His eyes went wide at the sight of his mother's swollen face. He started crying, begging Chris to stop, tugging helplessly at his sleeve. Please, Daddy, stop. Please don't hurt Mommy. But Chris was too far gone. He turned and kicked the boy, sending him flying across the room. I didn't watch the rest of the footage. I couldn't. It was too awful knowing the fact that the boy was in the hospital now, fighting for his life in the visitation room. I held back the urge to strangle Chris with my own hands. Chris, I said, my words laced with venom. You always said you loved Tony more than anything. But look where he is now, clinging to life because of you. How does that feel? Shut up. Chris screamed, his voice breaking. Tears streamed down his face as he covered his ears, rocking back and forth. His fists beat against his temples, each impact more desperate than the last. I stood there, arms crossed, my gaze cold and detached. Sure, you hate Fern, but what did that child ever do to you? Tony is just a kid. He didn't deserve any of this. I leaned closer, my voice dropping to a whisper. You already killed our child. And now, you, I said. Shut up, he roared, dropping chapter 8 to his knees in front of me. His hands clawed at my pant leg, his face wet with snot and tears. Elodie, I'm sorry. I didn't to scare you. He sobbed. I know I messed up, but you were the only one who ever really cared about me. I should have seen that sooner, but it's all Fern's fault. She did this to me. Please, forgive me. I looked down at him, his fingers digging into the fabric of my jeans. I forgive you, Chris, I said slowly, and for a second, hope flickered in his eyes. But forgiveness won't bring back what we lost. It won't bring back our child. We can have another baby, he blurted, his breath hitching between sobs. We can always try again. Elodie, I'll be better. I promise. We can have a family again, and I scoffed, sending him away with my foot as if he were something foul. A family? Do you still think you fit to be a father after what you've done? His face went pale. I leaned down, my voice low and almost taunting. You better be praying for Tony to survive, Chris. Because if he doesn't, they'll put you in a cell much worse than this one. And I won't lift a finger to help you. He panicked, lunging forward to grab my leg again, his nails scraping against the concrete. Please, Elodie, he begged, his voice hoarse. It was just a mistake, I wasn't thinking. You have to help me. I shook my head, a small, pitying smile on my lips. You should save your begging for Fern, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. She's the one you chose, after all. But he wasn't listening. Desperation had taken hold of him completely. He fumbled with his coat pocket and pulled out a small, shining object. Look, Elodie, look. His hands were shaking as he revealed a delicate pair of bracelets. It's the bracelet you always wanted, the one you kept eyeing in that little shop downtown. I got it for you yesterday, first thing in the morning. You see, I really am trying. Chapter 7. I took the golden bracelets from Chris's trembling hands, the polished metal gleaming under the harsh fluorescent lights of the police station. As I turned them over in my fingers, I felt nothing. No joy, no nostalgia, only a cold emptiness that mirrored the betrayal I had just uncovered. If I remember right, I said, my voice icy, yesterday morning, around this time, you were just leaving that hotel with Fern, weren't you? Is that why you bought these for me, because you felt guilty after cheating on me again? Chris shook his head, desperate. No, it's not like that, I cut him off. Then why, 6 months ago, on my birthday, when I told you I wanted these same bracelets, you refused to get them for me. You even called me materialistic, remember? His face went pale, and I could see the fight drain out of him. He had no rebuttal, no excuses left. With a bitter laugh, I tossed the bracelet into the nearest trash can. And to be honest, I don't want it anymore. I found it disgusting from the moment I saw it on Fern's wrist the day we met at the hospital when I went for the abortion. It was from you, wasn't it? Chris didn't say a word. He scrambled you toward the trash can, fishing through the garbage for what I had just discarded. I didn't stick around to watch him wallow in his shame. I turned and walked out, feeling lighter with each step. Once outside the police station, I spotted Claire standing under a nearby tree, her familiar smile cutting through the gloomy atmosphere. Elodie, she called out, waving enthusiastically. Her energy was infectious. I have great news. My aunt is finally Chapter 7 divorcing my uncle. Honestly, she's way too beautiful and smart for a greasy, disgusting middle-aged man like Joe Hoover. She deserves so much better. That's fantastic. She shouldn't stay for less, I replied, genuinely happy for her. That's what I thought. Claire beamed, grabbing my wrist. And you know what? I have a feeling that good things are coming your way too. Just hang in there. She squeezed my hand. Her optimism reached me, and I couldn't hold a smile in my face. Later that evening, I made a trip to my parents' house, ready to share the news about Chris's infidelity. My mother held me tightly, tears streaming down her face. Oh, my sweet daughter, I can't believe you had to go through this, she sobbed. My dad, on the other hand, was furious, his face red with rage as he practically growled, divorce him. You need talk. Chapter 7. Divorce that scumbag as fast as possible. He deserves to rot in jail. I know a good divorce attorney, he's the best in the business. Don't worry, Elodie, I'll make sure that man leaves with nothing. He won't get a single dime from my daughter. Mom chimed in, her voice rising in indignation. Exactly. Men like him should be struck by lightning. I heard he almost killed that homewrecker's son. Itho, I hate that woman for ruining your marriage, her child doesn't deserve it. The boy's innocent. I hope he gets locked up for at least 20 years. He deserves every single year. My parents were my rock. With their support, navigating the divorce process with Chris became much easier. I finally received the divorce certificate, officially freeing me from him. A month later, I heard that Fern's son survived. But he didn't come out. Chapter 7 unscathed. He was left paralyzed from the waist down. Fern spiraling into madness. I'd heard rumors about her walking around with a knife, vowing revenge on Chris. My work had become increasingly demanding, and just a few days ago, I had signed a big contract that required travel abroad. When I returned, I was greeted with shocking news. Chris was dead, brutally murdered by Fern. Ever since her son's accident, Fern's mental state had spiraled downward, and in a fit of rage, she had taken Chris's life, leaving a bloody scene behind. Authorities said she was almost certainly facing the death penalty. As for her son, he wouldn't be left homeless. After Fern's arrest, his biological father, the British guy who lived across the ocean, came and took him in, far away from the chaos he'd been born into. At least he wouldn't be left to fend for himself. Chapter after nearly a month of intense, grueling work, today felt like a breath of fresh air. I decided to take Bear, my golden retriever, out for a stroll. The sun bathed the world in warm, golden light, and the sky was a brilliant blue that seemed to stretch on forever. Bear happily trotted alongside me, stopping every now and then to sniff at flowers or inspect a patch of grass. The gentle warmth of the sun on my skin and the feel of the fresh breeze made me realize something. I was at peace. Life had found a simple, comfortable rhythm, and I no longer felt the weight of those dark days dragging me down. This, I thought, was how my life would be from now on: bright, calm, and finally, truly mine. The end.